my pleasure to introduce Joel Thierstein, who is both a lawyer and a PhD. So he's spent even more time in school than I have. Joel is the director of our Connections project here at Rice, and he's also the associate provost. I said it correctly, not the associative provost, for innovative scholarly communication. And Joel has a many and varied background in everything from media and telecommunications to the law and a degree in chemistry to boot. Prior to coming to Rice, he was at Oregon State University, and he served as a professor at Baylor, and we'll forgive him for that. Purdue University Calumet, and was a visiting professor of communications law at my alma mater, Syracuse University. He has more than 10 years of media experience. He's worked in radio, television, cable, and newspaper, so he understands Convergence. He's done all the different formats. He's worked in worked with industry. He worked with Sony. He worked on the MPEG consortium, and has worked with the National Association of Broadcasters. He's a voting member of the Advanced Television Systems Committee, and has written extensively on telecommunications. And since we're small at Rice, and he might be our leading expert, we're going to tap him for this. He's written books including Birds in Flight, Satellites in the New Millennium, which is now in its 3rd edition, and Religion, Law, and Freedom, A Global Perspective. He's been quoted extensively in the press, and he holds a doctoral degree from the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse, as well as a law degree. I'd like to introduce Joel Thierstein.
Thank you. I want to thank all of you for coming and spending the day with us here at the Baker Institute. I'd also like to thank Dr. Derigian and Chris Bronk for all their efforts in putting things together. And one more group I'd like to thank is the infrastructure team that puts this on, and I'd like to give them a round of applause. For those of you who were not here, they did a yeoman's work in changing the lighting during the middle of the break here. So thank you guys all for your work. I'm not going to talk to you at all about telecommunications, despite Chris's wonderful introduction. I'm going to talk to you about education and where things are moving in the education sector with regard to the new digital infrastructures that are being created. And whenever I give a talk, I'm never quite sure how much perspective to give people because, again, we have a very diverse crowd. When I was a professor, I knew where my students were and that kind of thing, but now we have a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds here. So let me start off with kind of a little bit of a broad perspective on where we're going. In the beginning was the world, and the world was without form and void. The world was analog. Oh, these were dark times indeed. This is my Baylor background, getting a little preaching going. But a hero came on the land. His name was Vinton Cerf. How many know who Vinton Cerf was? His name was mentioned before. Almost everybody. That's good. Well, let me clear this up for those of you who don't know. Vinton Cerf is the real father of the internet. It's not that other guy. It's him. And I had the opportunity to have lunch with Vint a while back, and at one point during the lunch, he leaned over and he said, "I don't know, I created this internet. I don't know if this is a good thing." And I said, "Oh, here we go. This is it. This is the moment of truth. This is Oppenheimer and the bomb. This is when he reveals all the dark secrets." And he said, it's everywhere now. I can't get away from it. I can't get away from all of this internet. It's ubiquitous. And that's what Jim was talking about earlier this morning, is that the internet is everywhere. And it's not just computing that's everywhere. These computers are all talking to each other now. And he said you've got computing in everything. It's in the computers that we have on our desktops. It's in our email. It's in our BlackBerries. But it's not only in that. It's in our appliances at home. It's in our clothing. We have computers in our hearing aids now that tell us which direction to hear. It's incredible, all this internet technology, and it's all talking to each other now. It's all interconnected. And he said, I have this great fear that when I come home one day, I'm going to go to my refrigerator and try and get some food out, and the refrigerator will be locked, and it won't let me in. And the refrigerator will say, I'm sorry, Vin, I've been talking to the bathroom scale, and you've been putting on a few pounds, and maybe you need to take a few off. So take a few laps around the neighborhood. And by the way, I'll be talking to your shoes along the way, so there'll be no slacking or taking shortcuts. But then he leaned over later and he said, you know, the coolest thing is we're going to have satellites around Mars. So he's not jaded at all by this technology. He thinks it's wonderful, and evidenced by his continued activity in the field, given his, he's now in his 60s. But needless to say, we are in a time of change. Absolute, wonderful, wonderful. We're in a time of change, and learning is no different. The educational environment is in a time of change, and you can look at change in a variety of ways, but one of the ways that we like to look at change here at Rice is that change is an opportunity. It's an opportunity to advance the type of education we distribute and the manner in which we distribute it and make education more effective in the world. We have experienced a lot of change in a lot of different areas in education. We used to know where people were. We used to know where the learners were. They were right here. They were sitting in this room right here, and there was somebody like me at the front of the room talking to them. And in high school, they were sitting with the desks that fold and the, you know, things carved in the desk. We knew exactly where they were and all their environmental surroundings. And that made pedagogy fairly straightforward. We didn't have to worry about, now, I don't know where they are. They may be at home. They may be at work. They may be, you know, this guy. They may be anywhere. And things like, you know, and Jim talked about this before, things like this and the BlackBerries make it possible for you to get educational information, not just your work information, but educational information anywhere you are in the world. And that's changed pedagogical models. So we don't know where people are, and that changes the way education has to be delivered. We don't know what time of day it is when people learn. Again, we used to know what time of day it was. When I did class in the morning, people were half asleep, and I knew what time of day they were experiencing my lectures, and so I had to do this and run around and make sure they were awake. At noon, like we are now, and I realize I'm one of the few things standing between you and lunch, I will go quickly. And I had to do the same thing when I had students. I knew they were getting hungry, they were getting restless, and as the hour went on, I knew where they were. As opposed to the morning classes, I knew they were waking up and they would get more at the end of the lecture. So I structured my lecture accordingly. Now we don't know what time of day they're experiencing our educational content. We don't know what time of day or how long they're spending with the educational content. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 5 hours. We just don't know anymore because they're sitting on their computer. Well, we can kind of get information, feedback, and that kind of thing, but we don't know in advance how long they're going to be spending with our materials. And so when we create content, we have to create it differently than we used to. It's not just hour block lectures. Here's the homework assignment. I know how long it takes you in the evening to do this. You go home, you do it, you come back. We used to know exactly how much time they spent with things. And so all of this is changing, again, the way we create informational technology, or information and that technology that goes with that helps us create the pedagogy. The other thing it's done is created the lifelong learner. Again, because learning doesn't end. When you leave Rice University's hallowed halls here and go out into the world, now you have to continue to learn, much to the chagrin of the students who realize, oh no, I have to keep going. I have to either come back to Rice or I have to go learn things online. I have to look at this now as my learning tool. And so we have this lifelong learning phenomenon. When I talk to students, or when I've talked to students over the past few years, I tell them you're going to change careers 5 times before you end your work life. Not jobs, careers. You're going to completely change who you are as a person in your work life. And that's a big deal and the parents are, you know, oh my goodness, they're shocked and this can't be right, because they're parents from, you know, like me, who have kids that are coming into college, and they didn't change careers 5 times. Well, I did. You heard my resume from Chris. But most people didn't change careers who were my age 5 times. But now, because of the way technology is impacting every part of society is changing. And you have to adapt to the changes. And so learning has to adapt as well. Because again, when you leave Rice or any other university you attended, you have to expect that you're going to continue to learn the rest of your life. In the old days, you could get a degree. It satisfied your requirements pretty much for your life, and off you'd go, and you'd retire, and that would be the end. That would be great. You learned, and then you executed. Now you learn, you execute, you learn, you execute, and that's the 5 minutes that I've been talking. That continues on throughout your life. And so we have this lifelong learners who have to continue to adapt to society's changes, and their educational needs they're expecting their educational needs to be met. And so we as educational providers have to ensure that their educational needs are met. we have changes in access to different types of markets. We can now reach out to global markets. We don't have to, we're not limited to these 3 square miles here at Rice. We can reach out to the world. Almost everybody can reach out to the world now. And so we'll talk about that in a minute. We have access to different types of what we used to call challenged individuals. People who are physically challenged, people who are mentally challenged, can now be, we can now reach out to them through new learning technologies and make learning accessible to those individuals who previously were shut out of the learning environment. We can customize learning. So if you're a particular type of learner, if you're a visual learner, if you're an auditory learner, we can reach out to you with those materials in that format that makes it most easy and most convenient for you to learn. And so this, again, allows us to advance in what we're doing and expand the scope of our learners. We're headed towards, and this is my baby, by the way, here. She comes with me to all my presentations. We're headed in a direction towards what we call a blended learning environment, where we have a variety of different learning pedagogies with which you gather information. Some of it's the old-fashioned way with the textbook. You read the materials, you do the, work on things, the problems and whatever. Other ways are we have now visual materials, we have oral materials, we have audio-visual materials, we have interactive models, and we have experiential learning like she's doing here. This is at NASA down the road, where you can experience what's going on. You can get this kind of firsthand, this is real-life stuff. And all those things are now part of the learning process. We have something also changing in the world called just-in-time learning. And this is a shift in pedagogy. In the old days, we used to do what we call just-in-case learning. When I stood up here, I would talk to you about all the things that I knew about telecommunications. And I would prepare you for a career in telecommunications, and out you'd go. And the students would come back, and hopefully they said to me, they said, wow, that one thing you said in that one class was great. That changed it made it possible for me to be a success in the field. Some of the other ones would come back and say, well, what you said was great. I never used it because I went in to sell shoes at the mall. And so I never used what you said, but it was just in case. It was nice to know that, just in case I actually went into telecommunications. And so we have a shift now where the workforce, the corporations in the world don't care that you have this broad base of knowledge. They do at some level. But really, the business case for them, they're all interested in the money, and Jim's corporation is no different. And we're working with a few of these corporations around the world. They're interested in, I want to get my employees to solve a problem. Because if they can solve a problem, they can save me money right then. And I can go to my boss and say, they now have solved this problem for me. So they're looking for databases, repositories of information, or either created by themselves or by others, where they can go out and solve the problem. And so an example is, we've got, and this is the case that we made at Rice to British Petroleum, who is now a partner of Rice University. And we said, look, if you're going out on the platform, and then we had the oil people up here before, if you're on the platform and you have something go wrong with the rig, you've got to solve that problem right then. You can't wait 6 weeks or 2 weeks or whatever for somebody to come back from vacation, for somebody to go off and take a class that they maybe now understand how to solve the problem. They need to learn how to solve the problem now. And so learning is changing from this kind of classroom environment to, I need to learn how to solve this problem now. And they see the business advantage of that because they're losing $10,000 an hour if this rig is not working. And so all of a sudden the light bulbs go on. Yeah, we need that learning infrastructure. We need that broad base of learning infrastructure so that we can grasp information from here and there and put it together quickly, on demand, and we can present that to our employees can gather it, or somebody up or above them can present it to them and say, here, learn this, within the next few hours so you can save us money. And so the business case is immediate for corporations. And they understand that. They understand that broad need. So Rice has been studying these problems for a number of years, and Rice's answer and solution to a lot of these issues is connections. This is our founder, Rich Baranuk. I'd like to acknowledge our co-founder, who's in the back of the room, Sidney Burris, Dean Emeritus of the College of Engineering. Welcome, Sidney. And I'll tell the story. Sidney can correct me later on of how this all came about, because it's a nice introduction to what Connections' purpose is and what its value is. Rich was a wonderful, newly minted PhD tenured professor And like all tenured professors, myself included, now I'm going to write my opus work. I'm going to go out into the world and I'm going to write the opus work that will save us from humanity. And so Rich went to his very sage advisor, Sidney Burris, and Sidney said, no, you're not as smart as you think you are, because your opus work will be out of date by the time it's in print, because it'll take you 2 years to do it, and by the time it's out there, you'll be 2 years out of date, because that's how long the printing process takes to write a book. It's 2 years. You get raw through the book, you get it, go through the process of finding a publisher, et cetera, et cetera. That's how long it takes, 2 years. And Rich's electrical engineering, digital signal processing is his area of expertise. It advances, hourly. Sydney's behind just by coming to this lecture. So it's a fast advancing field. And so Sydney was right. So Rich went away and he came back and said, I've got it. I'm going to put this on the internet. I'm going to do this. It'll all be digital. It'll all be right there immediately. It'll be available for everybody. And Sydney once again said, no, you're not as smart as you think you are. We gave you tenure at Rice, but you're not as smart as you think you are. You have a problem. You're an expert in this one area of digital signal processing. And apparently, and I'm not a digital signal processor, but apparently it's a very broad field and there's a lot of areas of expertise, like there is in telecommunications and other fields. There's a broad area. And Rich was an expert in one area. And Sydney advised him that his book would be great in that one area and okay in all the other ones. But it wouldn't be a stellar work. The way to make it stellar was to include everybody in this. All of the experts in all of the different areas of all the different areas of digital signal processing. So Rich, again, diligent student that he was and a mentee of Sydney, went off, and what he came back with was Connections, which enabled people to come together from a variety of different areas and put together the best in the field to create a super textbook. Was the original concept, and this would create the super textbook in digital signal processing. And it could be applied to any field, which is, again, Connections. It doesn't have to be electrical engineering and digital signal processing, but that's our core, that's our origins. And so, again, from 1998, this grew and grew into what we have now is a large repository of information where you can go and gather information. You can put ideas and concepts in. You can pull information out. Authors can either create information, they can create, teachers or others can create courses or series of modules of information. Because again, all of the Connections information is modularized because again, presumably you're an expert in one area, not all of the areas of your discipline, and you can pull different pieces of the different modules of information out, assemble them together in a course or a collection of information to create a super high-end level of information, a collection of information. And again, the other thing is that learners can feed back into the pool. The students can put information back in. They can say, again, Rich and Sydney were very bright students, and one board member here at Rice, one of the Board of Trustees, told a story last night where he corrected his advisor and changed one of the theorems that his advisor was working on. This is an opportunity for the students to create information back into the system because we often forget, and I'm as guilty of that as anybody else in academia, we forget that the students are very bright and that they also have a lot of information to feed back. And one of the speakers this morning talked about his 17-year-old son, teaching him how things work and giving him fresh perspective. I have a 9-year-old that does the same thing. We gain a lot of information. There's a lot of people who were previously not part of the information system that now can be because of this process. And I think it was Lloyd who talked about how do we engage those people out in the world. Connections is one way to do that because we engage, anybody can put things into Connections, and I'll talk about that in a minute. If you think of Connections as this kind of primordial soup of all kinds of different things, that can be all withdrawn and put together and organized into some organized pedagogical fashion where the process or progress of information makes sense. We call that a course or a textbook in contemporary language. In the future, you guys are going to figure that out. Our kids are going to figure that out. But that's kind of what we're familiar with. Again, that information can be personalized. The information is reusable, and we'll talk about this more as we go along. And the technology that makes this all possible is XML technology. We're an XML-based platform. How many people are familiar with XML? Okay, most of you, that's good. So I won't spend too much time on this. You know the power of XML and the ability to meta tag things, and that creates amazing possibilities in terms of linking information together, but also what we used it for, and this is how I got to the project. When I came across Connections, I was working at the College of Oceanic and Atmospheric Sciences at Oregon State University, and looking for other people working in XML. We used XML for all of our modeling because you can tag each element within an atmospheric picture and say, okay, this is element X and it does this, and you can teach each element to be what it's supposed to be, and so that when you hit play and the model runs forward, each element behaves as it's supposed to. And for those who are pop culture fans, if you watched Star Wars, the last 3 episodes, you watched the first Star Wars, and George Lucas' artificial intelligence program was pretty much the same as every one before that, where you had one guy fighting and you had 10 other guys doing exactly the same motions, and you had to, nothing happened that was unique in the battle. It was just a whole bunch of interspersed shots. At the end, he tagged each one of his soldiers to behave independently of the others and react according to what was going on around them. And depending upon how far away they were from whatever event was going on, they would behave differently. And so each soldier behaved differently. XML is similar to that, and it gives you the same kind of power within the educational scope, where you can tag a hydrogen molecule so that it knows it's a hydrogen molecule, and you can tag an oxygen molecule so it knows it's an oxygen molecule, and you put them together and they behave appropriately. I usually give a quiz at this point. What's 2 hydrogens and an oxygen put together? Music, same thing. Again, in Connections, and this is again tagging into what Lloyd talked about, tapping into what Lloyd talked about, anybody can be an author. Anybody can put things into Connections. Everybody's got anybody can have an account. It's not complicated. If you can type your name into the computer, you can have an account. My 9-year-old has an account. It's just not that hard. We've got, again, a variety of people coming together to work collaboratively. And again, you find other people working on the same type of projects you do within the environment, or you can work on your own project, set up your own group. All that's possible. And again, so it takes advantage of this Web 2.0 community where you have collaborative projects coming together, working with people from experts in a variety of different fields working together. And again, XML allows you to, well, in some sense, forces you to partner with people who you traditionally wouldn't partner with because of the way the information is tagged and the way search structures come up. Because anybody can put things in, we have a variety of people putting things in from around the world. Sunil Singh is one of our largest contributors. He is an electrical engineer, no relation to Rice, from India, doesn't have any ties to us at all. Decided that his kids' high school physics curriculum was very poor. So he built his own in his free time. He has apparently more free time than I do, but he built a lot of work into the electrical engineering, or into the physics curriculum, just to help his kids out. Now it's used all over the world. We've got people in a variety of disciplines. It's not just the math and sciences anymore. Catherine Schmidt Jones is a stay-at-home mom, piano teacher in the evenings and weekends and what have you. And she is one of the largest contributors to Connections as well. And she went looking for a book that was appropriate for middle schoolers on music theory. Couldn't find one. And so created her own. Her book is now used around the world. And Sydney can tell you stories about, he's been to conferences where people have come up and said, well, I used Catherine Schmidt Jones. She saved my life because she taught my kids music theory. And these are people from Mongolia who came up to him. So they're all over the world that are tapping into this information. And again, these are people who are traditionally not part of the education process, who are now contributing back to the world. And Lloyd was looking for people to engage the society out there to contribute stuff back in. One of the organizations we're working with is NASA, who is looking for the same thing. They're looking for broader contribution. They understand that they have a great deal of expertise within the organization, but they're looking for people to come in from the outside and contribute information back into the process, because they know there's people out there who are exceptional that they haven't been able to reach through traditional means. So we've got all these people putting stuff in, and we talked also in the last series about information overload. How do we do this? How do we manage all this stuff? It's everywhere. And as wonderful as my 9-year-old is, and her interests are space, and so she contributes to the NASA kinds of things, I probably wouldn't read her as the leading expert in any field. In, she's great and all, but she's not an expert in astrophysics. So we have to figure out how to maintain the quality, because, or figure out how to get the information, because I can't sit through all of the information that's in Connections on astrophysics. It's too much. I couldn't possibly read it all. I'd spend the rest of my life reading, and so we have to figure out some other way to do this. So what Connections has come up with is what we call the lensing system. And a lens, basically, is an area that you can go to. These are traditional vetting institutions. They are people who we already trust in society. We trust the IEEE. IEEE is the largest professional society in the world. It's Electrical Engineering Professional Society, but it's one of the big ones. And it vets information in Connections. It looks down and says, we have looked at that, that's appropriate. And so if you're an electrical engineer, you don't have to sift through my child's theory of resistance. You can look at Sydney's. And again, she's wonderful and all, but Sydney's probably a little smarter. And so she's, you're going to get the same vetted information you were before. However, if you decide that that's not enough, and I want to look outside of this traditional world, you can. In the old days, you couldn't. You were stuck with that. You got a textbook, that's what you read, you're done. Nowadays, you can look outside of that. You can look broader than that. And you can look to the next area of expertise and say, well, IEEE is great, but they have biases like every other organization. Every organization has biases, and Chris read off some of the ones I'm on, and I will happily admit those biases because, and some of them I don't know about, but because we just operate in our own worlds. But every organization has biases, and you look at this and say, I want to reach out a little bit more. I want to look a little bit past the biases. And I want to go into a new area. And because the way that the information is structured and everybody can be a part of the information pool, you can look beyond the biases that we have and look beyond the traditional world of education and look into new areas. And because you can, if you're a corporation, because you can then get feedback from your employees, these are people with fairly large amounts of knowledge about your organization and how it works. And so corporations are very interested in this kind of, I want some internal cycles and flows of information within my organization. And so they're very excited about the possibilities of Connections and Connections like the future of that kind of technology, because they can get that information back from their employees. It's knowledge that was walking out the door when their employees left. And they're very concerned about that. And the health industry is one, and as we experience the retirement of the baby boomers, this is a big problem in society now. We're losing big blocks of information because these baby boomers are leaving and not leaving any of the information behind. And capturing it all at the 11th hour as they're going out the door is not the most efficient way. We need to start doing it right when they walk in the door. Because we lose them at various points along the way. They shift careers, they move on to something else, whatever, but they have information to contribute back. And because of the way Connections is structured, those employees can start to give information back from day one. Because they hear a lecture, they say, that's not how I learned it in school, this is better. Or, that is how I learned it in school, but I had a better way of doing it all along. And so they can put that information right back into the system, and we're capturing the knowledge of the employees right away. And again, it's creating more knowledge, but there are vetting institutions who deal with that already. They're already in place. Corporations already deal with this. And the corporation can look back and say, yeah, that's, hey, the manager or supervisor, that's right. We better switch our endorsement from this block of knowledge to this one. Or this is good in one spot, but that one's better in this other spot. So we better endorse both relative to what location you're drilling in or whatever the problem is. The other thing that Connections provides, which is, again, very important in the educational world, and I don't know how many of you are educators, but lots of times when you're an educator, you point to something and say, please go back, students, look at this website. The students go home at night, they type it in, it comes up, there's nothing there. You get the 404 error, you get nothing. I'm sorry, this doesn't exist. Or they come back and say, wow, that was a great porn site that you sent me to, wonderful. You're cool. You're like, wait a minute, no, that's not right. And so Connections provides permanent versioning so that whenever, if you have a vetted version of something, it stays there permanently. Even if somebody modifies or adapts it, and we'll talk about the modification and adaptation in a minute, but even if somebody takes your information, modifies it, moves it along, the original version that you endorsed is always there, or that you found that was endorsed is always there. So when you go back, it's always present. And so you don't lose that original version, even if society advances and you decide to stay behind because you think you're right, and you might be. and maybe society's going off down the wrong way. We talked about that during the break too, that sometimes society's gone crazy and they're developing new things that are going to make no sense. And you stayed here, you stayed home, you are the right answer. And so permanent versioning allows you to maintain that integrity of your data. And so you can stay in your data set that you've put together for your employees or for yourself to maintain your learning base. Connections, again, like every other digital environment, can easily be translated. We've got a lot of translation projects going on. We have translation projects into Spanish. Corporations are involved, nonprofits are involved, governments are involved in translating information. We've got Chinese, Thai, Japanese, all you name it, we've got it going on in Connections. It creates, though, this knowledge ecosystem so that everybody's participating from every country in the world. It doesn't matter what language you speak, everybody's putting information back in. And so this translation is part of that and creates this kind of, again, educational progress that now everybody can contribute to the process. Recreation is a big deal. Assemble a customized course or a customized collection of information. One of the groups we work with, Teachers Without Borders, says, that, again, there's no one size doesn't fit all. There's no way. It can't possibly work because we have a variety of cultures we're dealing with around the world. We have one of our stories that we like to tell about Mindo, who is professor of electrical engineering at the University of Illinois, was scheduled to teach a short course in electrical engineering, and decided he needed to prepare some materials for this course that weren't in existence. And he thought, well, I can sit down and do this. It'll take me 3 months. In Connections, he did it in 3 days and a long weekend, because the information's already there. He didn't have to write it. He could reach out and pick out what he needed, assemble it together, and teach off of, and this became a textbook that he uses at the University of Illinois. What makes all this possible is our licensing structure. We use a Creative Commons attribution-only license, which means that any information that's put into Connections can be used by anybody for any reason or any purpose, as long as you attribute it to the author and say that this information came from X. And so again, that allows this remixing to go on. This is the legal infrastructure that allows the remixing to go on. The replication or production of information, it can stay online, it can stay in this multimedia format. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But it can also be produced as books, CDs, DVDs, and we have a partnership with a corporation called Coop Enterprises, or Coop Incorporated, that does is our print partner. And I'll talk about the relevancy of print in a minute. But effectively, you can print customized textbooks. So if you're a professor or a corporate employee or corporate manager and you need your employees to read a manual and the manual has changed, or you have a different way to structure the manual because you're in Azerbaijan instead of in Russia, and you need a different structure of your manual, you can create the manual differently for each of your different sectors of your population. And the manual, again, legally, one of the reasons we have print still, legally, a lot of those documents have to be printed out and held, a bound copy has to be held. And some of you are nodding, you understand the law here, that lawyers are very fussy about that. I don't want something digital. I want something that I can hold up in front of a judge in a court and say, this is what we gave the employees. And so, you know, if you're a manager, you understand that you need that printed copy. And so you can print out copies in this modular format that can be remixed and however you want, put together however you want, personalized and customized to your people. Again, the Connections process is fairly straightforward. You can assemble what's in there and put it on demand. You can put your own information in the order you want and print that out and publish things yourself. Let me talk briefly about the value of print as I wind things down here. And Chris is getting nervous. We're getting late on time, and you guys are getting hungry. When I came here, I came from a multimedia background, and Chris talked a little bit about that. I came from the highest end of the coolest multimedia stuff. You know, in my lab, we had a globe. It wasn't the typical globe. It was a video ball, and we could display geospatial information on this globe. And as it turns out, the Earth is in fact round, and you could, well, sort of, and you can display the information on this ball. And Chris said I'm on the Advanced Television Systems Committee, which is the standard-setting body for digital television, so we did all the HD work. And HD is really cool, I agree with him. But that ball is amazing. That's cool. I'd buy one of those. HD, yeah, that's good, but that ball is cool, because I'm sitting on this side of the ball, you're sitting on that side. You're getting a completely different story than I am. You're getting a different perspective on what's going on the screen. It's amazing. So I came from that environment, and I got here, and they were doing print. I'm like, books are dead. What are you doing? Who's doing books anymore? That's not education. Education's not going in that direction. Well, yes, that's true. We'll get to that in a minute. But there is a value of print. First of all, print is a medium that was created for words, textual material. This lovely screen I have in front of me is not created for that. And as wonderful as these other e-readers and those kind of things are, they're not designed for this, for textual material. The book is. That books that you have, the things, the handouts that Chris gave you at the beginning of the thing, those are printed materials that are designed for reading text. That's what they're for. This machine here is designed for pictures and designed for visual displays and motion and all this kind of thing, and sound, and we got the sound here. But that's what it's designed for. And so when you have trouble and you're sitting and you're trying to read things on the screen, you're getting a headache and all this kind of stuff, that's normal. You're supposed to get a headache. You're not supposed to, but it's normal because that's not what this is designed for. Newspapers, they're designed for text and words. This was designed for video, for you to watch video on. And so there is a value because we still need words. As wonderful as it is to teach math or teach science through visualization and that kind of stuff, and I love that kind of stuff in science. And I teach my daughter as much visually as science as I can because she's 4 and she can't, or when she was 4, but she's now in 3rd grade, she can't read all that stuff that quickly. But when you do math and when you read Shakespeare's great works, you have to read it on a book. You have to have a book. This isn't going to help you. And it's not just that you can't turn this, sit in your bed and read it while you're laying down. It's just this picture wasn't designed for that. And so there is a value for print from that perspective. The other thing is, again, there's a need for print because you have, again, legal obligations for corporations and for educational institutions, particularly K through 12. The legislature and whoever the vetting agencies are who vet educational materials have to be able to hold up something to their constituents and say, I vetted this. I didn't vet that stuff that's online. That's, because that might change. Because again, we have this history in the internet of going, well, that was there last week, and this week it's something different. And it changes during the whole process, and you're like, no, I don't think that. And the teachers come back and the parents complain, and like, no, this is what I vetted, this book right here. And so the K through 12 process isn't quite up to the task of vetting digital information. Having said that, this is the future. Multimedia is the future of education, and Connections is certainly part of that. Because again, we know that this is the future of education. Everybody knows that multimedia is the future of education. Gaming interfaces, and Tony Elam is here somewhere from Baylor College of Medicine. Gaming interfaces are the future of education. This is not contested anymore. This is the future. And so if you don't have something that's interactive, you're out of the game. Well, Connections has that. I mean, this is again part of the process. We would be errant in our duties if we didn't do that. And so Connections has a variety of partners creating a variety of different interactive applications. We are accessible by any of the major video players as well, so you can put a variety of multimedia applications in. And again, we know that that's the future of education. In summary, the future is very bright in education. It's changing, it's dynamic, and this is truly an exciting time to be alive in education. Thank you. Did you want to take, Chris, questions? Yeah.
Could you comment on the contrasts with the Wikipedia in which everybody can edit?
Sure. The big contrast is Connections is what we call a forked situation where Wikipedia is a layered situation. If you go to search for Wikipedia, and let's take, is Pluto a planet? If you search for is Pluto a planet in Wikipedia, you're going to get an answer. And the answer is no, Pluto is not a planet. If you search in Connections, you're going to get a discussion. Because you're going to get the people who say Pluto is a planet, and you're going to get the people who say Pluto is not a planet. And so you're going to be able to choose which one you like, and you're going to be able to choose between the vetting agencies who say, the Royal Society of the whatever, and our provost, Gene Levy, can tell you which astrophysics society is the most important. But you're going to be able to see which vetting society has vetted this appropriately. And so one of the big differences between Connections is you're going to get to choose what the answer is. And again, you can go through the same vetted process, whereas Wikipedia, you get the answer. and you don't know where the answer came from. The other thing is connections is attribution only. Wikipedia has no authoring. It's anonymous. And so you don't know who said this. Last person in wins in Wikipedia. And connections, you get a discussion and you know who said it. Other questions? Yeah.
You mentioned briefly the Web 2.0 tools, social networking versus equality, and then you said that you look at this, peer reviews like the IEEE and so forth, and maybe some experts. What exactly have you found in terms of the use of the Web 2.0 tools? What are the ones that, let's say, are not so good compared to the ones that kind of passing your quality test?
Yeah, it's different for different disciplines. But if we look at generally, just kind of broadly at who's creating things successfully, communities of creators. It depends on who's in the community and how well they work together. Because sometimes if you have a community who's strong, if you have strong egos in all areas, then they don't work together real well. Whereas sometimes if you have a team leader and a group of people that are used to working under a team leader, those groups function very well and create things that are exceptional. Because again, as described earlier, we have these exceptional leaders in each area, and then there's an organizer who kind of drives things. So another thing we found is that if you've got somebody who is vigilant about pushing the group forward and monitoring things, that's a big factor. Because if not, if you just have a bunch of people who are kind of interested, then when they're interested and have time, it's thriving, the group is thriving, and the Web 2.0 is functioning great. When it's not, then they're not. And so what we talk to about corporations who want to make sure all of their groups are thriving is that you have to appoint a team leader. Somebody has to be a leader in each of the disciplines that you want represented. And so they can go out and seed those and say, okay, I'm going to get my people together and get them working. Because we want that content put back in. And usually once you get people started, they're pretty excited about going, especially the younger folks, because they're used to this kind of thing through MySpace and Facebook, and they're just kind of constantly putting information back into systems, wherever that is. Yeah?
Are there applications of connections in private communities? Let's say corporations that the connections that they formed within the corporations, they want to maintain the proprietary nature of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is originally no, there was nothing like that, but there is now. We've got British Petroleum, who I mentioned, is one of the partners who's interested in this kind of application. I've had talks with British Telecom and Cisco, same thing. They want that information kept behind the firewall so they can protect it, and they want kind of this Web 2.0 phenomenon, but they want it within their organization, not let everybody contribute. NASA, on the other hand, wants that as well, but they want to engage the outside world, so they want both. And so yes, there are private, and we're working on building that out now. So, good deal. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to Jerome Crowder before lunch. So we hope that we aren't going to delay lunch too terribly much. Professor Crowder is a research professor at the University of Houston. He's an anthropologist by training. He's a Latin Americanist, which interests me because I'm rather partial to Latin America since I spent some time in Mexico. His scholarship has appeared in visual anthropology, medical anthropology, American Ethnologist, and Anthropology News. He uses images to portray his subjects. His photographic exhibit, Sueños Urbanos, Urban Dreams, The Search for a Better Life in Bolivia, was sponsored by my former employing organization, the State Department. And it was an ethnographic study done in Bolivia. And focusing his effort on a predominantly Latino community here in Houston, Professor Crowder has partnered with some researchers here at Rice who do wireless networks, the network that Ed Knightley will be speaking about after lunch, and has followed the issue of how people use technology in what would be considered an economically disadvantaged, predominantly Hispanic community, and what people actually do with this. We've all heard the idea that we've heard digital divide mentioned and inclusion mentioned already today, but what actually happens when you provide the internet in a community that didn't have it before, and what are they going to do with it? So with that, I'll turn it over to Jerome and see what he has to say. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here, and I appreciate Chris's invitation. What I want to talk today about is a little bit about what an anthropologist does. I don't know how many of you guys know. I mean, I don't deal with bones. I deal with living human beings, and which are also interesting. I think I talked to my archaeologist friends, and they're like, the bones speak. And I was like, well, people do too, and you can actually have a beer with them, and that's what when I tell my students. I was like, all anthropology is really is sitting down, having a beer, and listening to people, and that's what we do. But in this case, we're not doing a lot of beer drinking. We're doing a lot of listening, and I just want to take you through, just some of the methods, just to kind of acquaint you with this, to kind of demonstrate that although we have all these great ideas about the internet and technology, we're still way high up. And we're really about bringing it down. Or actually not bringing it down, but starting at the ground level and working up. So instead of being deductively thoughtful about this, I like to think about it being inductively an inductive process. So like Chris said, I'm trained as a medical anthropologist. I first started going to Bolivia in the late 80s, and then switched over to working in Peru, all around Lake Titicaca with Aymara migrants, Aymara-speaking people who live around the Lake Titicaca region. You probably have seen photographs of folks with the bowler hats and the big skirts and all the potatoes. So I was interested in understanding how people, the Aymara, when they moved to the city, how did they deal with the health situation? How do they go about finding health care? How do their ideas of health change when they migrate? How does urbanization affect these things? And so I took a qualitative and a quantitative approach. Anthropologists like to be holistic, and so we try to use all kinds of data to inform what we do, not necessarily just hanging out and drinking beer, but living with people, not just when it was convenient, but actually I moved into a home in the barrios of what they call El Alto, which is a city above La Paz, and I lived with the family for 2 years straight, just to really understand what it's like day in, day out to be someone who earns less than $1,000 a year, has to subsist, raises 10 kids, and has to find health care. So, beyond that, what we call participant observation, lots of interviews, lots of questionnaires, using demographic data, medical histories, all these kind of things to put a picture together of what it's like to be an Aymara migrant in El Alto. Well, who cares, right? Why do you care? Well, at the time, USAID, your tax dollars, were building medical clinics in the city to provide health care for some of these folks because they had some of the highest infant mortality rates in the hemisphere, some of the highest maternal mortality rates in the hemisphere. All kinds of problems with folks there who didn't know. It's not that they didn't know how to get treatment, it's like they weren't seeking treatment. And so some of my work was able to inform AID on how to be a little bit more culturally sensitive to the needs and the wishes and the whims and the behaviors of the folks in El Alto. So how does all this come to photography? And this is where I make this connection with the work I'm doing. I use a technique called photo elicitation. I take a lot of photographs, I give people photographs, I have them comment on those photographs, and over time, people are saying, well, Jerome, take a picture of that, and take a picture of that, why don't you take a picture of that? And I was like, no, because I was thinking about their world in my space, and I didn't get it. Like, oh, you know what I ought to do? I ought to give you the cameras, and you guys take photos of your world, and then bring them back to me, and then we'll talk about it. Because what I'm really interested in is their worldview, not my worldview of their world. Does that make sense? So I started this huge photo elicitation project where I was, asking everybody in the United States who was dumping their film cameras for digital cameras to give me their film cameras, because then I could take them down there and pass them out. And I had, some sponsorships for film, and we could give them to people and just let them take pictures of the world. So One of these ended up being the 24 Horas de Puno project, where we took photos in Puno, Peru for 24 hours straight. The people who live there, the migrants who moved there, the students who I was teaching at the university, just so we could get an understanding of how they see Puno, not how tourists see Puno. So just as a, okay. So I think I actually have some photos. Oh yeah, there's one of my buddies. As I call this the critical theory approach. So working in collaboration with people to name what's really going on. It's not some, anthropologist helicoptering in saying, hey, you have this issue, let me study it. It's them saying, this is what we think is going on in our world. We don't have a name for it, or maybe we call it something else, but let's talk about it. And so, like I said, it's this bottom-up inductive approach to actually creating questions. So I'm not going into an area with a specific question. I'm going into an area with an open mind to find out what the issues are in that particular place. So, okay, so this is Pecan Park. We see it on the map. It's just so strange being behind the podium. I'm usually all walking around. That's why I'll use this. So Pecan Park, here in town, you can see here's I-45 South, here's 610, Broadway up this way, and this is Griggs Road. The city of Houston has defined this as a super neighborhood, or super neighborhood to be. And we do see this as a map. And they define it as a neighborhood. And they actually think, oh, these folks, it's a community. And we have to take that apart and say, not a chance. The people who live here don't necessarily see themselves as being a member of Pecan Park. All of these, if we were to actually, and this is what we're trying to do, take this place apart and figure out how do people really see their world there. Just because the political nature of it is Pecan Park, that's not the way the people on the ground see it at all. And that's exactly what I was finding in El Alto too. I mean, the way community is defined by the people with the power and the people who have the infrastructure to place or to provide people see it in one way, and the folks on the ground see it very differently. And that's what was happening with the USAID in their medical clinics, where they were placing these medical clinics in catchment areas. This will provide service for 40,000 people. Well, people weren't going there. Well, where the hell were they going? They were going to the places that they trust. It wasn't about just because you had a service close by that provided everything you needed. It was they were going to medical care providers who they trusted, whether they were Catholic priests or the local yatiri or the shaman, curandero, whatever. That's where they were going. So I kind of took that same idea. Well, what's going on in Pecan Park, and started thinking about it. All this started because of a relationship I have with a friend at Methodist Hospital. His name is Cliff Dashow. And he came up with this idea of actually creating a small box about the size of a PS2 for folks 65 and older to monitor their own heart health. And the idea was to place these in underserved communities where people normally go when they have problems. They go to the emergency room right away. This box would allow them to monitor their heart health over time, 3 or 4 times a day, get a green light. It would send data up to the wireless network, get crunched on a supercomputer. The data would come back to them. They'd see their little their curve, and then they would know how healthy they were, what they needed to do. They could see how if they managed their health properly, their curve would improve. And the whole idea was to find people in Pecan Park who were under the Rice TFA mesh, then to use it. And so we started talking to people in the community about 65 and older, what their beliefs were about technology, not if they wanted a box to monitor their heart health, but how do they even approach the television? How do they approach the telephone? Do you have a remote control for your TV? Does that confuse you? How do you use it? And actually sitting around with them in the afternoon and watching them watch television. Watching them interact with their technology, because if they're going to have a hard time working the television, they're going to have a really hard time monitoring their heart health or even understanding what that means. So Cliff and I got together, and we started doing some I started doing preliminary ethnographic work in the neighborhood. And I'll just kind of pass this on. This kind of explains really quickly what they're doing. So the little handheld device, sometimes going to a cell phone, sometimes connecting directly to the internet, getting crunched on the computer, coming back down to them. And then if they got a negative reading or something like that, then that would contact a community health worker who would be dispatched to the home and all that stuff. It's a great idea. Will it work? We don't know. Still working on that. So in order to learn what people think about technology and how they go about using technology, we employed a couple of different ethnographic methods. And so, like I talked about a little bit, participant observation, actually going and living with people. So observing people in their homes, at work, where they are all the time, what they do, and what they say they do. Because we all think that we do different things than we actually do. So if I asked you, so when you're ill, do you go to the doctor? Oh, yeah, every time I'm sick, I go to the doctor. Well, if I live with you, I notice when you're ill, and then I can notice what you really do, which is you don't go to the doctor. You wait 4 or 5 days. You drink your emergency. You take some siege. I mean, you do all these other things before you actually maybe begin a health-seeking process. So not that you lie, but we think about what we do differently than what we actually do. So that's one of the great things about participant observation. If you're constantly working with people in their lives, you really notice the how they discriminate between what they think they do and what they actually do. We used photo elicitation as a means of actually getting the worldview of the people themselves. So we asked them to take photographs of the things they would like to change in the community, about the things they like about the community, or what we call the neighborhood, and just come back to us with their ideas on how they see Pecan Park. And then these would lead to sometimes, hopefully, long-term interviews. So people who are really talkative about their community, really talkative about how the way they see the world, to speak with us on a regular basis. So not just maybe once or twice talking about photographs, but regular recurring interviews. So going back to their home once or twice a month, maybe once a month for an hour or two, and just sitting down, having a coffee, and just listening to people talk about their lives. Because we all like to talk about ourselves. We do. If somebody's really interested, in what you have to say, you're going to talk. It might take 4 or 5 visits, but eventually you break down and you start talking about yourself. The best story we know is that of ourselves. And if somebody's willing to listen, I'm willing to talk. And people do it. Not that that's a spy thing or anything. It's just human nature. So long-term interviews can be exceptionally important in understanding how people see themselves in the world, how they developed a worldview, the things that have affected them over time. Because if we take these synchronic slices of their lives, we don't really necessarily have the context to put all those things back together. We met them at this one point in time. We don't know what happened before, and we don't necessarily know how that propagates out over time. Okay, so, and then focus groups. And this is kind of the bane of cultural anthropology, but we do it because, especially in a place like Pecan Park, because we have some users and they like to get together and they like to talk. And sometimes it's easier to put people together in a group and have them talk about their experiences than they would necessarily individually. So actually there are 11 host families that host these antennas. And Ed's going to talk more about the network. I'm not going to go into any of that today. But we've gotten together with them. We've talked to them about their perceptions of what it's like to host the antenna, how they use the internet. And then one of the other things we're developing, and we really haven't gone into this yet, but Lin Zong, another professor here at Rice, is interested in the way people use handheld phones, right? So taking the daily computation off the desktop and putting it in your palm. And how do people do it? What do people in underserved neighborhoods really need in one of these devices? Like everybody keeps showing. I mean, that's so funny. We all get up here and we all show our devices. And we all have one. We're connected, right? We're all tethered to this stuff. We want to know why are other people, right? I mean, we want everybody to be, it's like I'm being married, Until you're married, you want everybody to be married. That's great. So we all want this, or it's not necessarily great. We just, we want other people to suffer, maybe. But so I was thinking, well, how do I combine visual anthropology, and what I'm really interested in is image analysis and how people interpret images, why they take what they take, and how they tell the story about the context of the image they've made. How do we do that and connect that with cell phones and wireless networking? And so we came up with this method that I call TAPE, time-allocated photo elicitation, which is actually creating a program for the phone that's been distributed to people that would then randomly select users and give them certain tasks at random times. And so it's combining a couple of methods that we use in anthropology, time allocation, where you just kind of show up and see what people are doing, random people at random times, just to kind of understand life and the issues and when they're doing things, with this idea of photo elicitation. So actually dinging somebody and asking them, okay, hey, take a photo in the next 5 minutes of what you're up to, and then it automatically, once they take the photograph, it turns on the voice recorder, and then they can talk about it, why they took the photo, why it was important to them, or better yet, they could take a picture of their armpit and just stick it in their pocket, right? That's still data. That's still interesting, because it's like, well, you laugh, but people aren't necessarily familiar with the technology. They don't want you to know those things. But over time, when will they start actually taking photographs? Okay, these guys just keep pestering me. Okay, I'm going to take photos of something. I'm going to take photos of my shoe. Or they become more familiar with the technology. They're using it more, and then we can actually track this over time, right? So just because they don't necessarily take photos of what we think they ought to be taking photos of course, God forbid, if we just ask them to use it in some way, then that helps us understand how they're thinking about the technology and how they want to use it. So I'm going to kind of motor through some of these because I know we're crushed for time and everybody wants to eat. In our case, participant observation had to become like a secondary method instead of our primary method because we weren't able to actually move into Pecan Park and live with people. We were going there at irregular times for varying lengths of time. And so we actually had to move into this idea of using photo elicitation. We have met with lots of different families, different residents. We meet them in many different places. And I guess what I have to say here, the last piece on that is participant observation ranges from being this fly on the wall where you don't actually engage with people at all to going native, which is when you cannot separate yourself from the culture in which you're living. So some of my friends who've gone to Brazil and never come back, we say they've gone native, right? They come back and they get on a plane and it freaks them out, and they just are never coming back into their real culture. And the two words that anthropologists use to describe these different perspectives of being, on the outside or on the inside are emic and edic. So emic being like from the native's perspective, and edic meaning, actually from an outsider's perspective. Just so you know, so you can go home and say, hey, as anthropologists talked about emic and edic. You can't find those words in any dictionary. The only place we talk about them is in anthropology. So anyway, okay, so photo elicitation became our primary method. We distributed these film and digital cameras. We asked people what they wanted. They could talk about that. In fact, that simple choice really led us to understand how people might react to technology. As you can imagine, getting either a disposable film camera that you just push one button to take a photograph, or a digital camera with lots of different buttons is relatively intimidating. So we really wanted to see, if we gave them a choice, what they would take. And based on their photographs, these became these can openers to discussion. So it wasn't necessarily talking about the photographs, but learning about the context in which they took the photographs, and then what those photographs opened up to other discussions about, well, this is a photo of my dog. Well, I got it from my cousin, and my cousin's mother died, and, well, where's your cousin's mother? Well, and it just opens up this huge discussion that you couldn't get any other way. So we really can figure out how worldview is composed relatively quickly. These long-term interviews was all about developing trust, and that's what I go back to over and over again. If we don't have trust with the people we work with, we cannot count on any of the data being accurate, and we cannot count on being able to help people in the way they if we want to help them, or actually understanding what they really need. So most people take 2 or 3 months to actually get to the point where they'll actually talk with us about things that they really care about. In fact, if you track your interviews over a year-long period, you look at the last 3 months as being the most accurate data, and you can pretty much toss out the first 9. Because you just know that people aren't really telling you everything. So after working in Bolivia for about 20 years, I look back on that and I go, man, those 3 years of my dissertation must be completely wrong. And I'd go back and I read it, and I was like, yeah, it pretty much is. So, but being a scholar, you have to say, I was wrong. Because if you can't say I'm wrong, then you're not learning anything. So, okay, so this new idea of this tape, which we're really kind of excited about, is doing a couple different things. So it's showing us how people are familiar with the phones, how they're using the phones, right? So what features they want, what features they use, and then who they're sharing these things with. A lot of these kids we give phones to share phones. It's not like it's mine. It gets passed around until the phone gets personalized enough that people don't want to show people what they're doing with their phones, right? So that's kind of interesting. Some of these kids type their papers on their phones, and then they'll send themselves an email to school and then print the paper out at school. So they'll sit in bed and type papers on their phones. Really cool stuff. And then if we do take all these information, all these data, and then we can compare it with the quantitative data. So we have this census data out there, things people collect through surveys, and it's really interesting to see where those data stack up. And not only that, but then the guys on the internet, the guys who run the network, we can pull down usage logs and look at what people say they do and what people really do, right? Anonymously. We're not going to look at specific users and then compare them, but it's just a way of looking at, okay, so many people are actually using the phone for these different things, and then when we sit down and talk to them how to use the phone, then we learn this and we can see what the discrepancies are. It's actually one of the first times in qualitative method history, to my knowledge, that we can actually do that. It's kind of cool. So actually, I have some photos that people took, and we'll go through this real quickly. Some of these folks that we're working with are massage therapists, translators, high school students, substitute teachers, bankers, drama instructors, nurses, Hispanic and non-Hispanic. We've a lot of the cameras we've given out have never come back. A lot of people, we go back and they're still taking photos 18 months later. Not quite ready to turn in the camera. Some of them actually use the cameras against their neighbors if they're stacking stuff up over the property line or making too much noise. They'll take the cameras out and photograph them, and then come back and say, "Hey, give these to me so I can take them and take them to police and stuff." So we've had a lot of issues though with the actual photo elicitation method. People not having time to actually take the photographs because a lot of the folks who live in Pecan Park who we're working with, work multiple jobs. They're working 2-3 jobs to support their families. They have family obligations. They forget to take the cameras with them, which is totally fine. None of these are problems. It's just issues that we've had in dealing with it. For the first 3 or 4 months that you do a photo elicitation, you end up getting photographs back based upon what they think you want to see rather than what they want to take. So it's kind of filtering that stuff out. And then we found that all of our incentives for hey, putting together a photo show, framing things, putting them let's go show the folks in River Oaks what life is like on the east side of town. Let's do that. And they're like, that they don't care less. I mean, that's not interesting to them. What they really wanted was compensation for everything they do, in the first place is money-based. That's what they wanted. So let's see. So some of these photos, I'll just show you some major themes. And one of the anthropological, one of our responsibilities is to be able to take these data and kind of step back a couple steps and start seeing themes in the photographs and themes in the data, what people are saying about their lives. And so we get photographs about trust, we get photographs about order, we get photographs about the environment, subsistence, health. These are some of the major themes. And so we'll just kind of run through these real quickly. The image on the left was taken by a nurse, and the image on the right was taken by a former drama teacher. We actually asked them to talk about their photographs. The nurse was so scared of being in Pecan Park that all the photographs she took were through the windows of her car. She drove around. Whereas our other friend this is the little homage paid to one of the guys who was shot in Engrando Park. And so, and they talk about their ideas about trust and their ideas about the neighborhood and how those compare. And so you get a really interesting perspective on what they feel like it's to be in that space. The environment, here again we have, this is kind of interesting. The woman who took the photo on the left, you can see that was at the beginning of the roll, and so it was a little exposed. And she was so worried about using a film camera, she thought she'd broken it. And she's like, she says something along the lines of, I'm a technophobe. I'm not good because of my fingers. When I touch something, I break it like the camera. I have computer phobia, really. So that tells you a lot, not just her taking that photograph, but her discussion of the way that photograph came out teaches you something that you wouldn't get any other way. You're never going to get that in a survey. And then Truman, these are his neighbors, and his neighbors really tick him off because they don't keep a tidy house. And they just throw stuff out in the backyard. And so, he's upset. The way he sees in his environment is that it's being trashed by people who don't care about the neighborhood. I can go through these real quickly. Trucks on the yard, right? This is a big political deal within the neighborhood. Who's parking in the grass? Well, two really different perspectives on this. So the photo on the left, people are worried about, see this as an asset, see it something to get to. Eventually, one day, we will have this truck up and running and we can use it as a resource. Folks on the right, again, sees it as unnecessarily blocking sidewalks, a distraction, bad for the environment, that kind of thing. The way people see their own everyday subsistence. Again, here's the Vietnamese woman who was taking lots and lots of photographs. This is her garden. It reminds her of being in Vietnam. She came to the United States in the 70s, and she's always kept a connection with her country through her garden. She raises vegetables according to what she had in her home country still, right? Whereas these are some of the kids on the left, some of the local kids who they made a video called No Remorse, and it was about how the police and the drug dealers are all corrupt. And they filmed it at TFA. They acted out gangland shootings. That's their perspective of what goes on in their neighborhood. Health, we'll get to these. One guy took a picture of his bills. He's had 5 surgeries in 5 years. And then, whereas the woman on the left, she took a photo of her food, and this is, these things are about staying healthy. So one guy's trying to be healthy or trying to get healthy, and the other person's staying healthy. So I'll just kind of move through these. Okay, so these photos and their elicitation and what people had to say about them led to long-term interviews, and a lot of these folks we got to know much better and have had relationship with for the past 18 months. But in doing so, we found some families who actually host the antenna, and they had issues with the antenna. They had issues with the network itself. And so that's when we contacted Rice and the TFA group, and we said, hey, there's some folks out there that don't understand why they have an antenna on their house. They don't understand what the internet does for them. Do you mind if we talk with them? And so we've developed some focus groups, and we've been working with these folks for a long time to really learn about how they see the network, how they see how it impacts their lives, how it impacts their children's lives. Some people actually claim to use the internet, but they never actually touch the computer, right? So their kids send the emails for them. Sometimes when the network goes down, one of the boys gets on his bicycle and he's ridden over to TFA to get the engineer technician to bring him back to his house to get him back online so he can keep playing his games or doing what he needs to do. So, I mean, the way the older adults see the internet and its utility as opposed to their kids really is interesting. And when you get into the homes and you start sitting down with the families and listening to them talk about their use of the internet, we really learn a lot. But I'm going to stop there because we don't have time to get into all that. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of, from the ground up, how we can begin to learn how people think about the internet, how people think about using technology on a day-to-day basis, because it is changing rapidly. And if we are to narrow this digital divide or this idea of digital inclusion, we have to rethink what that means and who's defining that, and why should we even think about defining it ourselves? Why don't we let the folks who are using it in the different neighborhoods define what it means to be included digitally? So anyway, thank you very much.
And stampede to the food. If anyone has a burning issue, or you can just
said that we're going to discuss the actual technology.
Sure.
I'm sorry, the RF technology, was it necessary to have an antenna like that? Can you use the point-to-point?
I'm gonna let Ed answer all that later, and that's the network and how the network functions and the way they've constructed it and why they built it the way they have is really interesting, and I am not in any position to begin answering those questions at all. But there are 16, I think, nodes now throughout the neighborhood. 11 of those, I think, are on homes that are owned by families. And those nodes are administered by the TFA Rice staff. It's a wireless mesh network with a 2-tier backhaul. Does that mean anything to you? Okay. So it's fabulous. I learned that by just, participant observation, right? I just absorbed that from the engineers. I have no clue what it means. Yeah. No, I know what it means, but yes.
If you monetize the value for their getting, and take someone who has had it for a while, would they choose to keep the technology or the money?
Well, I think after we actually sit down and talk to them about what the technology does, I mean, just helicoptering in and parachuting in this technology and expecting people to use it really doesn't work. What a lot of people are like, well, what do I do with it? What can I do? So, right, so once they understand that.
After whatever, a year or whatever period they
right.
And now you offer them a deal, whatever value is $20 a month or the technology. Do you have a sense of what would they choose?
$20 a month?
Whatever is the value, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the thing that they really, I mean, it does come down to economics at one level, not the use of it. If they see their kids using it, they're very much more interested in supporting it. I think a lot of folks well, this is a gross generalization, but say 45 or 50, see it as a convenience. Right, it just allows them to do things more conveniently. They can read the scores at home in Mexico, the soccer scores, or they can keep in touch with somebody. But they could have done that with the telephone. They could have done that with any of these other technologies. But when they see their kids doing things, their grades improve, connecting at a different level, it has a different value. And I don't know if that can be monetized. I think that depends on every family that's doing it for their own specific situation.
I'm asking because very much your philosophy was of not to try to make decisions for other people, but empower them to make their own decisions.
Exactly.
But in some sense, this very project was somebody decided that they're better off having technology than having the money.
Well, okay, and that's why the anthropologist brought in. The question was, why Pecan Park, right? And what are we doing with the network in this part of town? I think it was a matter of there being, an engineer who wanted to develop a network, and he needed a place to put it, and they wanted to put it in a part of town where those technologies might not be found otherwise, to see what would happen. I don't think that's the engineering question. I think that's the nonprofit organization's question. Like, if we provide technology, what does it really do for the folks who have it, or how can they use it better? Right? Or what will they do with it? And that's the real question. What will people do with it? Well, it's going to require a little bit of education. It requires a lot of different things. I don't know about how we can monetize that, though. Yes, ma'am.
His question and then your answer made me think of something, and I hope this doesn't sound negative, because it's not intended that way.
Oh, no.
But sometimes you pick neighborhoods. There's certain neighborhoods you're never going to have a railroad track in. And then there's some neighborhoods you are going to have railroad tracks in.
Right.
And I'm wondering, you won't see antennas in some neighborhoods, but let's put an antenna in another neighborhood.
Right. And
So
I can't answer that
if
question.
there's that kind of a flavor there.
Yeah, no. I wasn't going to go there because I don't think that's fair. Because, I mean, we were brought into this at a later date. But I think that it is interesting to see why it was placed where it was placed. But I think there was a genuine, I think there's a genuine interest in providing this technology for folks who might not have access to it otherwise. I think that was genuine.
No, absolutely.
So,
and I don't intend it negative.
Right.
I just want to throw another slant in it.
Right. Anything else? Everybody ready to eat? Okay, let's eat. Thanks.